Thank you so much for the kind words this morning. I think that from what I understand, and this is Open Line Friday, if you know what that's all about. Greatest risk in broadcasting, greatest risk in putting somebody behind the GBS pulpit. So good to be here, though. And these football stories, I could tell you a few of them about David Hartkoff. I have a shoulder injury that has lasted for these last 12 years or something from him. He and his cousin hit me. One of them was even on my team. But you know, you want to take out the youth camp president as best you can, and so somewhere along the line the ball was given to me to run, and the one that was on my team, supposed to be guarding me and protecting me on the way down, teamed up with the cousin. I don't remember which one was which, but I just know that they both hit me pretty hard, and my right shoulder hasn't been the same since. But Dave Hartkoff's all right anyway. Look out across the congregation here this morning. It's good to see Steve Klotz. He and I can go back a number of years, way back into elementary school. And so it's good to see him this morning. A number of various ones that I've been acquainted with. How many of you have been to Pilgrim Youth Camp, Midwest Pilgrim Youth Camp? Hands? Well, there's quite a few of them around. And I see Gumby over here. When Josh put the mic on me, I said, now don't play any games like Gumby does. A few years ago when I spoke at IHC, he had that mic on and I already had it turned on, but then he played games with me from back at the board. So, and lo and behold, Gumby comes in this morning, even after I said that to Josh. I've been watching online on YouTube some of these messages that have been preached here in chapel over the last several weeks. And when the first one came on of the series that Dr. Avery just recently concluded, speaking about walking by the Spirit, I got a little nervous because it wasn't very many days after Dave Hartkoff asked me to come and speak that my mind began to drift in this particular direction, and so I got a little nervous that maybe he was going in this series, going to cover some of the stuff that I want to look at this morning. And so I paid attention to it as he went through the series. I kept going back and finding out what was going on, and on my way over here this morning, I just listened to the last part of the last one. And lo and behold, if he didn't close out with basically what I want to give today. So how often does it happen that Dr. Avery sets it up for a guest speaker to come? I don't know how often that is, but I was a little nervous thinking about it, though. He's been talking about walking by the Spirit, and this is the subject, or this is the thought that I want to have permeate our minds this morning. And that is this: content to live on less. Content to live on less. Let's leave the real for just a moment and jump into a hypothetical. How many of you know Lauren Albright? You know Lauren? I was going to use Tim Lanigan, but I'm going to use him later, so I want to give him a break here. So I'm going to use Lauren Albright. Do y'all know him? Do you know him very well? This is hypothetical, Lauren. You understand this. I'm going to give you a Lamborghini. It's a Huracan 610. It's got a V10 engine. It goes from 0 to 62 in 3.2 seconds, 0 to 124 in 9.9 seconds. Its top speed is 202 miles per hour. Sound exciting? Do you all understand why I chose Lauren for this? There's some criteria that go along with me giving him this Huracan. He cannot drive it out of the county. He cannot drive it over any speed limit listed on the road that he's traveling. Cannot spin the wheels on any surface. There will be a GPS chip plugged in so that it will send me warnings on my cell phone anytime he reaches that point of breaking the criteria. At which point, then, I can log in from my cell phone and shut him down. Let me ask you a question. How long will he keep the Lamborghini? Any idea? Could he get out of the parking lot of GBS? If he did get out of the parking lot, could he make it to the highway? You and I probably, if you know Lauren Albright like I know Lauren Albright, he would not get out of the parking lot. Even before he tried, that engine would rev. He would listen to it purr and probably rumble. The reason why you and I would all have an agreement that he would not be satisfied with that criteria, he would not make it with that criteria, is because he would not be satisfied with living less than that potential. He would want to do everything that he could to see and to feel and to experience what that car was inadvertently designed to experience. No, it's not designed for United States highways necessarily. But people still get them and get in trouble with them, perhaps. How long would it be for you, any one of you, if you had that opportunity? I don't know very many of you, but I dare say that somewhere along the line, every single one of us, we're going to want to experience more than the criteria that goes along with that car. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 18, a very, very familiar passage of Scripture, speaks to us and tells us that we are to be filled with the Spirit. Verse number 15 said, "See then that ye walk circumspectly," or diligently, carefully, not as fools, but as wise. Verse 17, "Wherefore be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. Be not drunk with wine wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit." You've probably already understood thus far in your education here at God's Bible School. If you've covered Ephesians at all, you've probably come to the understanding that that verse really is speaking about something that is continually going on. Being filled is the way most often it's spoken and given. Sometimes we think about this being filled as though there's some kind of a leakage taking place, something that is leaking out. But maybe more so than just a consideration of something leaking out, it would be more along the line of an organic filling, something like going to the table. It's about noontime here, getting close. I guess lunch is to follow chapel, and you're going to go and get yourself something to eat. And I don't know what better there is to eat except for a good venison and mashed potatoes meal. You know, those back straps that are nicely tenderized and rolled in flour and fried, and that mashed potato serving that's got some cream cheese mixed in with it to make it nice and rich and fluffy. And wow, I'm telling you what, I'm getting hungry already. You're ready for lunch. And I can sit down. I was thinking that perhaps Mark Cravens would be here. He'd be jumping up and down for that kind of a meal, and I'm pretty sure that Dave Hartkoff would be as well. And we could sit down and we could enjoy such a tremendous meal of venison and mashed potatoes, as well as other things go along with it. And at the end, get up from the table and say, "I am stuffed. I'm full. I couldn't eat another bite. I'm satisfied completely and beyond satisfied." But then, within just a few hours, not days, not weeks, but then just in a few hours, something's telling me that I need something else to eat. Or maybe something's telling me that I want something else to eat. Or Are there any leftovers? Let me go warm them up and try again. As good of a meal as it was, as wonderful and as satisfying as it was, there's still something in a few hours that's speaking to me saying you need something else. Maybe it's something, metabolism kicked in. Maybe there was some manual labor going on, and so it kicked in that metabolism and began to use up the energy from that feeling of being full. The exercise of life. The daily things of life. Maybe for somebody here today, it's being a wife. There's Kyla over here, a newlywed wife. And sometimes it's the thing of being a wife or being a husband that just continues to draw from the energy from the filling up. Maybe it's being a student. Maybe it's just simply being a student that draws the energy from the spiritual filling. Maybe it's being an employee. Perhaps it's being in part of some kind of leadership. You know, a boss or manager or leadership of some kind and in some way. And it draws away from your spiritual energy. Maybe it was that phone call. Did you get one of those? Did you have one of those recently? That specific phone call that troubled you and wore on you? Or perhaps it wasn't so much a phone call. Maybe it was that disappointment that came. Something happened and you were greatly disappointed. Maybe your balloon burst. Maybe something sad took place and you were greatly, deeply disappointed. Maybe it was that responsibility that was placed on your shoulders, the sense of need in that responsibility. And it began to draw on you. Or no, it wasn't the responsibility. Maybe it was that trial or that testing time, that tribulation that drew. But on the other hand, it could be that contact with that one individual, that person. The one that you love, you really want to draw them in and put your arm around them, but every time you get close, there's something of a personality clash or something that's going on between the two in the subconscious that draws and really burdens. You could just say a bunch of it's ordinary life living next door to Murphy, where things happen. The tire goes flat. The tree falls on the car. Murphy's Law is bound to kick in sometime or another in the midst of our lives. And in these times, we find that the spiritual satisfaction that we once had is now gone. And somewhere in between, it didn't so much as leak out as much as it was just being used up. The filling from Sunday is diminished, or the outpouring of His presence in private devotions is now waning, and to the point where, did it really happen? I'm so hungry, I'm so dry, I really need something else. Life goes on, and the venison and the mashed taters are gone. It's only just a memory. And unless I'm going back to the source, unless I'm going back to the table, then I'm struggling in living in the fullness of the Spirit, or I'm struggling to walk by the Spirit, as Dr. Avery has been talking about. I'm not talking about going back for, or even suggesting going back for snack foods. I'm not talking about going back to the table and picking around and pushing around the plate and making a scene or making a show of receiving. We can all do that. As a matter of fact, it's probably a good possibility that we could fall into that trap at any point in our spiritual lives because of our human makeup and because of the structure that we are into and your daily schedule. It would be easy for us to fall into that trap to where I'm going through the motions. I'm sitting at the table, I have the plate of food in front of me, and I push it around with my fork. But I want to think that in my mind here, in my heart, that as I understand what Paul is telling the church at Ephesus, that it's more than just sitting down and making a scene or a show, but it's really participating and partaking and receiving. Urgently seeking God for what He has for me, not simply content living on less, not happy with having the power of the car under me, but having the reality and the experience that goes along with the power, walking by the Spirit, living in the Spirit, enjoying the fullness as I am being filled. Faithful is He that calleth you, who also will do it. Hang on to that verse. Mark it down, write it down, do whatever it takes to hang on to the faithfulness of God. As He calls us to being full, He will provide the necessities and the means if we step in and do our part. You've probably been to church a time or two where somebody stood up and testified and they said the same thing as they did the last 4 times or more. Thank God I'm saved, sanctified, and satisfied. Amen. That sounds good, doesn't it? I'm not knocking it. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not trying to put anybody in a box, but just stop and think about it. Saved, sanctified, and satisfied, as though now I've got everything going my way. It may not be. That may not be at all what the person has intended by that statement in any way, but sometimes it comes across to me as, saved and sanctified and satisfied, and whew, it's all over with now. I'm on easy street. Satisfied, or am I seeking, longing, looking for more and more of Him? Jesus tells us in the Gospels, He said, "Blessed are the hungry and the thirsty." I didn't understand that when I was a kid. Well, I thought it was ever satisfying. Jesus told the woman at the well that if you drink of this living water, you'll never thirst again. But then Jesus turns around and says, "Blessed are ye that are those of you that hunger and thirst." See, it's a satisfying of continually being filled by that which is fully and continually satisfying. John Parker posted something on Facebook back in August, I believe it was, and I wrote it down. I put it on a little Post-it note and stuck it on the pulpit at church, and it was there for, 2 months. It was there for a long time. I just recently took it down. This is what he posted. He said, "Give us longing hearts for an encounter with you alone." The context was speaking naturally of God. Give us longing hearts for an encounter with you alone. We can have so many things pressing in upon us, so many things drawing our attention, so many voices calling us. The important thing is that we have a heart that is seeking after and longing for an encounter with the Almighty, an encounter with God Himself on a continual basis. Being filled as I urgently, ardently, earnestly seek for Him, not being satisfied or content to live on less. The psalmist uses the experience or the illustration of a deer in Psalm 41 or 42 verse 1, as the deer longs for the water brooks. As the deer longs for the water brooks, so does my soul long after Thee, O God. I don't know if Mark Craven still preaches that message on that he has on that verse or not, but I still have it ringing in my ears from a number of years ago when I heard him preach about the deer longing and striving and running, making its way, finding the place of protection and strength in the water brook. recently heard a story that Dr. Marlon Hodel gave, and it's about a man by the name of Ross Minkler. He was the pastor of a church in Indianapolis a number of years ago. The church was growing. It was really doing good, growing large, and people from other churches were even attending on Sunday nights as their evening services were being canceled. It seemed as though that Ross Minkler was the man with God's message at the time, and people were interested in God's message, and they were being drawn in by the large crowds to fill his sanctuary. I believe it was the largest church in Indianapolis at the time. As he was involved with the ministry there at the local church, somebody's eye was drawn to him from the college and the college church. And so they invited him to come and speak there in their chapel and to their student body. And they loved him. The people loved him. They were enthralled by his style and by his message. It wasn't long after that there became an opening on campus for the pastor of the campus church, and his name was mentioned. It became knowledgeable to the people around that Ross Minkler would be available, could possibly be available, and so they actually interviewed him, I believe. He began to dream of the possibilities of going to campus church, the large student body that was there, and to be a part of that crowd to where he could feel as though he was really doing something and being somebody and helping so many people and molding their minds and molding their lives and working in such a wonderful environment, shaping their views. As time went on, he began to think about it more and pray about it more. He was really convinced that it was the thing for him to do. And some time had passed, and he had his heart set on going to the campus church. And somebody else, another preacher, was speaking to him one day and was unaware of the dream of Ross Minkler. And he said, just off the cuff, he said, "Did you hear about Brother so-and-so being called to the campus church as pastor?" His heart sank. His balloon deflated, causing in a very short time for his ministry to stagnate. And while walking to church on a Sunday evening, walking down the alley to the church, the alley that used to at one time be thronging with people making their way to his church for his sermon on that Sunday evening, he said now was empty. It was vacant. There wasn't anybody around. And it hit him. It dawned on him. Something's happened. What's wrong? He made his way to the church and walked into his study and got down before God and was urgently seeking for God's filling, wanting to have the fullness, the being filled that was spoken of in Ephesians 5:18. He had lost it. He had found that in the midst of the cares of life and the situations of life, even for him, the disappointment of life, that he had been drawn into being satisfied with something less than what was called for him. As he prayed and wept and sought God, God came to him and met his heart's need and his heart's desire. And he experienced the fullness of the Spirit. And it was said that he felt and experienced the cleansing of sanctifying flame as never before. You and I, are capable of being content, living on less. Even though we understand, and even though we have it before us, and even though the privilege is before us to come to chapel and to go to church and to study God's Word, it is ever before us that we could become content with living on less. The routine of life creates a satisfaction of mediocrity. But the call or the command of Ephesians 5:18 is that we have earnest desire for an encounter with God. Don't be satisfied with less. Don't be content with living on less, but have an earnest heart to walk in the Spirit of God and be filled with His presence. When Ross Minkler arose from that time of prayer, time of seeking, as his heart was refreshed and his heart was renewed and his heart was cleansed, and he went from there and he penned these words, "Let me lose myself